So Ralph, tell us a little background about yourself. You've been here for a while.
I have. I guess my real mechanical knowledge started back in 1976 when I started working for Conrail.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always been a tinkerer and liked working on things, but I really started working on big things, the rail equipment. And I just sort of found out I really enjoyed it. Being able to pull things apart. And I was on a rail gang, so we were putting in rail. And so everything was mechanized, but it had been the mechanization of the 40s.
It seems like how we all caught the bug doing that. Loving to take things apart and tinker and see how they work and why they work.
I liked a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
I liked a challenge. And it just let me concentrate like a Zen. You were meditating on actually what you were doing, and it would be engulfing.
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten into cars as a kid, and I was rather a poor kid, so I would go to R&R's junkyard, and for $25 I could get 2 cars off the lift, delivered to my house. One would always be a rust bucket, and one would always have good mechanics. And I started off with Saab strokers, 3-cylinder, 2 strokes, and it was because you could literally pick the engine in and out of the car by yourself. You could flip it over, pull the crankshaft out, and just separate it, and literally just with a vise put it back together. And it was just, and I started learning, and I said, "Oh, geez, I'm having fun."
Those are the good old days when the junkyards let you do whatever you want.
Yes.
Walk right in, bring your little toolbox.
Oh yeah, Rubinski
carry out all the parts that you ripped off all the cars, and the guy'd look it over and say, give me $5.
It was literally, and then, I bought for $5 a 61 Pontiac Tempest with the 4-cylinder. And that was the first engine I rebuilt. I said, oh, I'm kind of having fun. And so whenever I really wanted a car, I would find a car I really wanted, and it would usually be junk. And at the time, they were foreign cars, and broken foreign cars are not worth much. The same way today, because expense and expertise. But I had, railroad was a week on, week off. So I'd have plenty of time to work on stuff, and if I was off at work, well, the stuff could be repaired, at machine shops and things like that.
Well, it was the early 60s when the big three started getting worried because Volkswagen was coming into the country.
Yep.
Well, other economical 4-cylinders, and that's when they were like, well, we have to do something. And they started reinventing and cutting up motors and coming out with 4-cylinders. It used to be 8-cylinders.
That's it.
So on.
The Pontiac motor was a 4-cylinder, but it was half
of a 289, 389, half a 389.
Half of it had either 2-barrel, 4-barrel, same starter, same generator, everything. Yep. Made it kind of easy. You just get V8 parts.
Right.
And it was a great little car. Independent rear suspension.
Yep.
Great traction in snow. Because at that time I lived...
Same design as the Corvairs.
Yep. Because I lived up in the country.
Only that the transax was in the rear and the motor was in the front.
Yeah. And it was... So as winter cars, they were fabulous, and I really enjoyed it. I had quite a few of them.
How long have you been here now?
I have been here since '05. I answered an ad, and about 6 months later, I got hired in the winter. And I started off at part-time for a couple of weeks, then went to full-time, and I've been pretty consistent for 16 years now,
There doesn't seem to be a lot of people in the next generation that want to take over what we do.
No.
What we know.
No, they just want things easy. They don't have the the drive, or, I mean, some of them do, but it's a,
I don't think the interest
is not there.
not there like it used to be.
No, no,
Like,
because
working on the Franklin.
yeah, working on the Franklin, you have to, I mean,
You're not going to pull up a ton of information anywhere. I don't even care. Not even on the web. You're not going to pull up a ton of information.
no, and it's you get pictures, and so you have to have a real grounding in the basics. Because it always comes down to the basics.
Correct.
Doesn't come down to fancy technology.
Right.
Even though people want to believe it, it comes down to having a grounded knowledge of exactly how things work in what order.
Yep.
And with this Franklin, automatic inlet valves, which means that they're atmospheric valves. As the piston goes down and creates a vacuum, that's what opens the valve. Nowadays, it wasn't accurate enough, so they have rocker arms.
Right.
Now, the rocker arms were always on the exhaust because you needed the timing, When Otto developed the forced cycles, he didn't think it was going to work because it was too complicated. Threw it out. And Goebel Benz and Maybach saw it in the scrap heap and pulled it out and said, "Oh, look at this. Otto wouldn't make this, And that's how we got It started with just a simple design because previously they were Braden engines, which really ran on kerosene and a hot tube. They had a little flame.
They had to be pretty tough back then, though, to go outside in any weather, crank this thing over, get it running.
Yeah, well, they didn't use the cars in the wintertime.
They didn't use them at all?
They put them in the garage.
Really?
Yeah, it was very rare to see a car in the wintertime, in the really early days.
Uh-huh.
They just would slide and be all over the road. Right over there, Tommy, there's the radiator. Be all over the road, and they were inconsistent. You could, brakes, well, they were still, putting your foot on the tire type.
They didn't have windshields or anything either.
Right.
No.
Right. No. Even the 07 Cadillac had nothing, right?
Right?
No.
Yeah.
No windshields.
No, it wasn't
They
even.
didn't use them in
wasn't even an
bad,
option.
in
There
bad
you go.
weather. They didn't use them. It wasn't until they got the closed cars, then they called them the doctor's coupes, because they would go out on their runs. But even before that, the buggies and the sleighs, they didn't have much comfort unless you had a carriage.
Yeah.
They were used mostly in the cities. You didn't see a carriage running around out in the farm country.
Right. Right.
They just get bogged down in the snow.
Right.
Yeah, and the roads
Yeah,
were no
you're-
good either.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, there were no paved roads, and
No,
you're
No.
not going to get a lot of traction with these little tires.
no.
Oh no! If
You're-
they
you're
first
just-
started
you're gonna
off
just,
with
you're gonna
no
just
tread,
sink right in.
like this caddy, no tread at all,
Right.
because they thought it was the most surface area. Yeah, and talking about cranking, that's the biggest misconception of old cars is cranking. You do not want to create a circle, because at one point, if the engine starts, it will always go faster than you, and it will just break your arm.
Right.
So you just want to pick it up
You're
gently.
supposed to put your thumb in like this and turn it.
You know?
You're not supposed to have your thumb on that.
Yeah.
So if it wants to come back, it can come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it took a lot of practice for people because they weren't mechanical. It was horses,
Yeah.
and the most mechanical thing was probably a can opener that they ever got, and that was because it weren't gears, and it took quite a lot to be able to develop the engine so that it could be useful, because they were around for 30 years before they could be put in cars because they were so heavy. And the oiling system.
Sam, some of the, in the beginning when you were doing the mechanical work in the garages and stuff. I remember you telling me one time it was brake adjustments and what kept you busy?
Well, when I first started as a mechanic, I was probably 17 or 18 years old, and I got a job in a gas station, a three-bay gas station that did mostly mechanical work. We sold gas, but that was a secondary thing, the mechanical work. And I learned from this guy. He had learned on fire engines and stuff, but he wasn't a really good mechanic. But I learned the basics, and he gave me a chance to learn how to do everything. And so I did everything in there. And back in those days, the cars weren't as sophisticated as they are today. For instance, the Fords, you still had to adjust the brakes once a week if you used the car a lot.
Once a week?
Once a week. Oh yeah, I had a 36 Ford, my first car. If I used it a lot, I'd have to adjust the brakes every week.
You had a lot of people coming back.
Yeah, well, all the cars you had to adjust the brakes. There was no self-adjusting brakes, no such thing. If the brake system was a little more sophisticated, then it would last a little longer. But it depends how much, if you used the car a lot, you were going to adjust the brakes a lot.
How long did they run on the oil between changes?
Well, usually every 1,000 miles they were changing oil years
1,000.
ago. Yeah. And we were doing an awful lot of clutches. People weren't we used to have this one guy a block away from where I was working. We'd put a clutch in his car once a month because he couldn't work it. Otherwise, a clutch could last you for years.
Right.
If you knew how to use it, last you forever practically, almost
Right.
the life of the car.
Uh-huh.
But this guy, once a month, it was a sure thing. He'd be in and get a clutch.
Oh, boy.
And we probably, after 1 or 2 weeks, we'd be adjusting the clutch. And then we knew it wouldn't be long, he'll be in and get a new clutch. But you had a lot of those, you know. We were doing a lot of clutch jobs on all kinds of cars. There was no standard transmissions when I first started. Well, they were maybe just starting to come in, because when I was 16 or 17, somewhere around there, the Hydromatic came in. But we weren't working on that kind of stuff. They always brought those back to the dealer. It wasn't until later that we have garages that specifies just transmissions and
Right.
stuff.
Right.
It's an evolving thing, continuously,
Oh, yeah.
continuously.
Yep.
Yeah. But we were doing a lot of small stuff, you know.
Points.
But brakes,
Yeah.
well, tune-ups were big.
Oh, yeah.
Spark plugs were
Even when
changed.
I-
We'd
you
throw
know,
in
when I
spark
started
plugs
out-
away left and right, you know.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody get a tune-up in the spring and in the fall.
Yeah, yep.
You know,
Yeah.
just it was normal. Nowadays,
Yeah. So there was a lot of work out there. Today, there's not much work.
no.
No, there's more cars, but
Right.
less work per car.
What do you think the future is of the older cars, the restorations, the repairs, the hobby?
Well, now colleges are offering courses in restoration. There might be 5 or 6 in this country, but there's a dedicated people who really find the mystique of old cars. And that's really what it is. You have to do everything manually, and it just becomes involving because you look at them and everything is right out there, and you go, how's that work? And
If
But
you have
it
a,
isn't-
if you have a good mechanical aptitude, a lot of this stuff you can figure out.
you have to figure it out.
Right. It might take you a little while. You might have to think about it and come back to it.
There's trial
But-
and error.
There's plenty of private schools out there. You look on the internet and or on the TV even, they're advertising that they'll teach you in a year or 6 months to be a mechanic, but only on certain things.
Right.
And when it comes to these early cars, there's always going to be a few guys that are going to want them.
Right.
Like now, for instance, we're just selling this car to a new fella. He's just getting interested in old cars.
Right.
So there's always going to be a few, a lot less than years ago. But there's going to be a demand for that, and there'll be isolated cases. Now, there may be a specialist that maybe bought one because he was interested in it. Now he gets used to it, and now everybody goes to him.
Right.
And that's how it started years ago. There's companies now that work just on one-cylinder Cadillacs. They're far and few between. There's a couple of them are closed down. One of them in Pennsylvania has pretty much closed down. You can still get them now and then, and they used to have a lot of surplus parts, but they're all used up.
Right.
And so it's going to be tougher and tougher, but there's been so many of these cars restored that they're going to be there, and they're going to be in pretty good shape. They're going to need some things that wear out, but an engine is an engine. If you know how to rebuild an engine, you can rebuild any of them. They're a little more sensitive in terms of being more fragile.
Right.
But otherwise,
The internal rotating parts. And,
the principles are the same.
correct. It's
So
still
there's
a,
always going to be somebody.
Still an
They're
air
going to be
compressor.
spread out and far few between. But even like back a few years ago, most of the fellows have passed away, but there used to be guys that specialized in nothing but Stanley steamers.
right.
There was a guy in Pennsylvania that would build you a whole body for a Stanley steamer. He's gone.
Right.
You probably wouldn't get anybody now unless you get a good woodworker and have them a sample to work from. Yeah. But there's always going to be skilled craftsmen around.
True.
They're not going to be easy to find,
Correct.
and they're going to be costly.
Right.
And they're probably going to be retired guys. Because that's what's been keeping the hobby going. Like now, we need some parts for that 35 Packard. Can't get them because
Right.
the guy that was manufacturing them died, and the guy that bought the patterns don't know how to use them. And so,
Right. That leaves it up to us
yeah, we got to make it
to
work.
make the parts. Right.
Yep.
You find the right people.
Yep.
Get them cast.
Yep.
Make it happen.
Yep. Yep.
And there are people out there. You just need to find
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. You got to find them. That's the big problem today,
Right.
to find the guy.
Yep.
But with the internet, it's a lot faster. But a lot of these old guys don't use the internet.
Right.
And so their skills are still obscure because they're not on the internet. You can't find them.
Yep.
But somebody else finds them and tells you about them.
Yeah. Yep.
But you have to use the grapevine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in I think it was the 90s, I was doing a 60 Thunderbird, and I got a name of a guy with a phone number who was apparently doing spot-on wire harnesses for concourse restorations. I called the guy up, and he answers the phone. Hello? Not even a company name.
Oh, yeah, they're like that.
And
Even today, I called
he's-
somebody the other day. I said, are you such and such? Oh, yeah.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, and I got talking to the guy, and he had X amount of employees. I don't know if it was 15 or so, and he said, because I was asking him, you're hard to get a hold of. He said, I know, and I want to stay that way. He said, I don't want to get any bigger.
Right.
Yeah. It is a fine line between a hobby and a business. And you can't, many people don't want to transfer to the business side because it destroys their own personal pleasure.
Right.
And it moves you away from hands-on to paperwork.
Yep.
And because finding the parts in itself is a full-time job.
Yeah.
You just don't find them. I mean,
No, if you're doing it for yourself, you could stop.
Yeah.
You could walk away. You can
Yeah.
come back to it next week.
I'll give you an
If
example.
it's a customer, it's a whole nother ballgame.
Like yesterday, last night before last, I had to call L&L Auto Trim. He inherited the business from his father. He makes nothing but running board trim. His father died, and nobody was doing it. All of a sudden, I found out he picked up on it. But he only does it at night. He's still got a regular job. With him, it's a hobby.
Right.
Yep. With him, it's a hobby. And I knew that. And for like 2 or 3 years after his father died, you couldn't even get the stuff. Then all of a sudden, like, he put an ad in because he had all this stuff, but you couldn't get him during the day. You have to call him at night. I called him 2 nights ago, and I bought the chrome that we needed for the white truck.
Oh, okay.
But I knew who to get it from. But he still advertises in Hemmings. The trouble is, the average person would call him during the day, wouldn't get him.
Oh, right.
He doesn't even answer his phone.
Right.
It's a busy signal. You think he would say, hey, I'll call me at
You
such
can't
and
leave
such.
him a message, a voicemail, anything.
No, he doesn't care. But he's got all the dies to make he's got a pamphlet that thick.
Wow.
It's got a hell of a business. But you don't sell that stuff every day. See,
No.
it's tough. Most all these guys, that's a hobby to them.
Right.
They sell it afterwards.
Right.
And a lot of them are old, and so they passed on, and if no one picks it up, then there's companies sometimes try to buy them out, but they can't handle it because they don't know. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, even some of the bigger companies that are out there, if they're thinking about producing a part, reproducing a part for a car, they may throw feelers out to see what kind of response they get. Because before they tool up and put all the investments into making this part, what's my return going to be? So if
Well,
you only
it's
get if you only get 10 responses, then it might not be worth the investment.
You
It's
look at
true.
antique automobile, and occasionally a guy will put an ad in. I'm going to tool up for this. How many you guys want it? Let me know. If they don't get enough, they won't tool up for it.
Right.
Just like you say.
Right.
Yep.
But they put the ads in like Antique Automobile or the Gazette or one of those. You see those quite often.
Right.
It is true. People
Yeah.
want to.
I run into that a lot with my 64 Rambler American because there aren't a lot of them left.
Right.
A lot of them didn't survive. And
Well, if you find a guy that
not gonna-
specializes in Nash or something and has been able to buy out some of the dealers,
yeah, and a lot of that is depleted now
Yeah.
too. And I've talked to a few of them, and
it's all used
you know,
up.
they said, I'm not going to invest $40,000 to reproduce this part.
Yeah, well, but a lot
And
of
I'm
them
not gonna make my money back.
They were buying out the dealers in the end. For instance, I know this guy in Middletown, Amato. He bought all the around, within an area from his house. He bought all the Model T parts he could get. And he had them set up in his cellar. You go down his cellar, it was a regular parts department.
Wow.
Yeah, it's still there. His son stopped in here maybe a year ago now, and it's still there.
Wow.
His son don't do anything with it.
Huh.
But Model T parts, they're all over the place.
There were millions of them. You
And
know.
I can remember going into Amara Ford back in the 60s. And in the middle of the showroom, they had this pile of parts. And I was buying parts. And I said, what's this? He says, that's all going to be shipped back to Ford, and they're going to redistribute it to the dealers. Because otherwise it would have been lost.
Right.
How much of that stuff got thrown away? I can remember back when I was a kid, I could go into the Ford dealer here in Saybrook and I could buy a wheel. I could buy a fender, anything I wanted. They still had them up in the attic.
Right.
I was buying points from them for the Model T coils.
Yeah.
He was trying to sell me everything, and I didn't. I had no need. Who needs a wheel?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we only knew, right?
Yeah.
Back then,
Yeah.
you can buy a piece of trim for $10, and now
Yeah.
it's $500 if you find one.
Oh, if you can.
We
find
only
them.
knew.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I was a friend of Dick Shaler from Shaler Olds, and his brother was in charge of the parts department. He come in. He gave me one day. He says, "Here, take all this chrome. Just take it. Get it out of here." Racks for the top of the station wagons and all
Wow.
that stuff they had extra. Now, if they were smart, they would have sent them back. they can send a percentage back of whatever they buy. If you buy $1,000 worth of stuff here, you can send back maybe 200. So there's no reason to have dead stock.
Right.
If you're on a ball, you can ship it back
Right.
and get credit for it. And to redistribute it, you know.
Yeah.
But a lot of guys don't do that because they don't give a shit, especially if they don't own the business.
Yeah.
It's true.
It just collects.
Right.
I mean,
Too much work to send it back.
Yeah.
getting parts. I mean, I'm into foreign cars and Italian, you know, and you have to leave the country. You have to go to England or have someone in Italy or France get you the parts, and because they're the only places that had the volume.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm restoring a Lancia Scorpion, and you really have to know the people on a first name basis and have known them for 10 years for them to think about, you know, looking in their drawers, because it's just not worth it.
Right.
You know, and we often at this company have to go to England because there's a thriving business of reproduction parts.
That's it from Vintage to Muscle, and we'll see you next week on another adventure and see what we unearth next week. Thank you.